I am Natalia, 34 years old. I never imagined my own mother would betray me for her new family. Growing up with just mum after dad died, we were inseparable. Then Richard and his son Jason entered our lives. For years, I ignored the signs of favoritism until the unthinkable happened. They completely wrote me out of the will, giving everything to Jason. But fate has a way of revealing truth. Let me know where you are watching, from hit like and subscribe, because family betrayals cut the deepest, and what happened years later changed everything. My childhood was just mum and me against the world after my father died in a car accident when I was only 5 years old. Sarah, my mother, was devastated, but determined to give me the best life possible. We lived in a small apartment on the east side of town, and though money was tight, our home was filled with love. Mum worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat as a receptionist during the day and waitressing some nights. On those evenings, I would stay with our elderly neighbour, Mrs. Patterson, who taught me how to bake cookies and told me stories about her youth. Despite our financial struggles, those years built an unbreakable bond between us. Mum never missed my school performances, helped with homework, and always made time for our Sunday morning pancake ritual. We would laugh as we flipped misshapen pancakes and talk about everything under the sun. Those moments defined my understanding of family. Everything changed when I was 12, and Mom met Richard at a company event. Richard Wallace was everything my mother thought she needed, a tall, distinguished businessman with salt and pepper hair and a confident smile. He owned a successful real estate development company and lived in the affluent part of town. Their romance moved quickly. Within months, he was a regular fixture at our apartment, bringing gifts and taking us to restaurants I had only seen in movies. I remember the first time I met Jason's son, who was 10 at the time. His mother had moved across the country after their divorce, leaving Jason primarily in Richard's care. He seemed shy but pleasant enough with his father's confident smile and expensive clothes. I tried to make him feel comfortable, showing him my collection of books and art supplies. He seemed more interested in his handheld video game, but I figured we'd have time to connect. When Richard proposed to my mother after a year of dating, she was ecstatic. I was genuinely happy for her too. The wedding was small but elegant, held in the garden of Richard's sprawling home. I served as my mother's maid of honor, wearing a pale blue dress that made me feel like a princess. During the reception, Richard raised a toast saying to my new family. I felt included and hopeful for our future together. After the honeymoon, we moved into Richard's house. My new bedroom was twice the size of our old apartment, with a window seat overlooking the backyard. Mum helped me decorate it with my artwork and photographs. "This is your space, honey," she said. "I want you to feel at home here." I believed her. I truly did. The first few months as a blended family seemed promising. We had dinner together most nights, took a family vacation to Florida, and celebrated holidays with elaborate decorations and gifts. But looking back, I can see the subtle signs that I chose to ignore. When Jason needed new sports equipment, it appeared immediately. When I mentioned wanting to take additional art classes, Richard suggested I should focus on more practical subjects. My mother had always been my biggest cheerleader, especially when it came to my artistic abilities. Before Richard, she'd proudly display my paintings and drawings, telling everyone about her talented daughter. Now she began echoing Richard's practical approach, suggesting that art was a nice hobby, but not a realistic career path. Throughout middle school, I maintained excellent grades while developing my artistic skills. Mum still attended parent-teacher conferences, but now Richard joined her, dominating the conversations with questions about college preparation, even though I was only in 8th grade. When teachers praised my creative work, he would nod politely before steering the discussion towards STEM subjects. As Richard's influence grew, I noticed Mum changing. The woman who once laughed freely and made impulsive decisions now checked with Richard before making plans. She dressed differently, spoke more carefully, and seemed constantly aware of his expectations. When I asked about these changes, she would smile and say, "Richard just wants what's best for us, sweetie. Has given us so much." By the time I reached high school, our family dynamic had shifted dramatically. Jason, now attending an exclusive private school, received a new car for his 16th birthday. When my milestone birthday arrived 6 months later, I received a practical watch from Richard and a heartfelt but modest gift from Mum. She apologized privately, explaining that Richard felt I should save for my own car to learn responsibility. I still remember my high school graduation clearly. I had been accepted to several universities with partial scholarships for my academic achievements. As we discussed options after the ceremony, Richard took control of the conversation. "The private universities are too expensive," he declared. "The state school will be perfectly adequate." My mother once, my fierce advocate, simply nodded in agreement. That night, I overheard them discussing Jason, who was finishing his junior year. Richard was already planning to send him to an Ivy League school, cost be damned. That's when I first felt the cold reality that in this new family, I would always be second class. But I still had my mother, or so I thought. I had no idea how completely I would eventually lose her. College marked the beginning of my increasing alienation from the family. While Jason was being prepped for applications to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, I enrolled at State University with my partial scholarship. The stark contrast in how our educations were valued became impossible to ignore. My freshman year, I called home weekly to talk with Mum. She always asked about my classes and seemed interested in my campus life. But the conversations often cut short when Richard needed her attention. When I visited during fall break, I was shocked to see Jason's bedroom had been completely remodeled with new furniture and the latest gaming system, while mine remained unchanged since the move. Meanwhile, I was working 20 hours a week at the campus bookstore and another 10 as a restaurant hostess on weekends just to cover expenses. My scholarship only covered tuition, leaving room and board books, and everything else to me. When I mentioned my financial struggles to Mum, she sounded genuinely concerned, but offered the same explanation as always. Richard feels strongly that earning your way builds character, Natalia. She paused before adding, he wants to make sure Jason has the advantages he never had growing up. Try to understand, honey. We need to respect his wishes regarding his son. By sophomore year, my visits home decreased dramatically. Each return to Richard's house felt less like coming home and more like being a guest. The defining moment came during winter break, when I arrived to find my bedroom had been converted into Richard's home office. My belongings were boxed up in the garage with a few essentials moved to the guest room. When I found my mother alone in the kitchen and asked about this change, tears welled in her eyes. I tried to tell him to wait until you were home, she whispered, but he insisted the office was necessary for his expanding business. It's just a room, sweetie. The important thing is having you home. But it wasn't just a room. It was the symbolic erasure of my place in the family. That night, I heard Richard and Mum arguing about her being too emotional over practical decisions. The next morning, he presented me with a new laptop for school that I hadn't asked for, as if that could compensate for literally removing my space in their home. Holiday gatherings became exercises in discomfort. Richard's parents openly doted on Jason while barely acknowledging my existence. At Christmas, Jason received a collection of expensive gifts, including international trips and designer clothes, while I received gift cards and practical items. My mother would slip me additional presents later, away from Richard's watchful eyes, which only highlighted the inequality. The one bright spot during these years was my friendship with my roommate, Tara Garcia. From different backgrounds, but with similar family complications, we formed an instant bond. Her warm, chaotic family welcomed me for weekends and holidays when I couldn't bear going to Richard's house. With the Garcias, I experienced what a blended family should feel like, as Tara's stepfather treated her and his biological children with equal affection and support. In contrast, my mother's calls became increasingly infrequent by junior year. She always had excuses, too busy with charity committees. Richard wanted her to join helping Jason with college applications or social obligations with Richard's business associates. Our once intimate relationship had been reduced to short, superficial conversations that left me feeling empty. Despite everything, I excelled in my graphic design program, making connections through internships and building a portfolio that impressed my professors. When I landed a prestigious summer internship before senior year, I called home excitedly, only to reach Richard's voicemail. Mum called back hours later, sounding distracted, as she congratulated me before quickly turning the conversation to Jason's college acceptances. The final blow came at my college graduation. I had secured a spot on the dean's list and graduated with honors, but my mother missed the ceremony entirely. Jason had a regional tennis tournament the same weekend, and Richard insisted they both attend to support him. She sent a floral arrangement with a card promising to celebrate later, a celebration that never materialized. After graduation, I moved into my first apartment, a tiny studio in the city where I'd accepted an entry-level position with a marketing firm. The day I signed the lease, I felt a conflicting mixture of pride and abandonment. I'd achieved this milestone completely on my own, but the absence of family support left a hollow feeling I couldn't shake. As I arranged my few possessions in my new space, I realized I was truly on my own now, for better or worse. The next 7 years passed in a blur of career advancement and minimal family contact. I built a reputation in the graphic design industry, moving from the marketing firm to a more prestigious advertising agency. My work won several industry awards, and I was finally earning enough to live comfortably without financial stress. My apartment, though small, was beautifully decorated with original art and filled with books. On the surface, my life looked successful, but the family wound remained unhealed. I maintained sporadic contact with my mother, calling on birthdays and holidays. These conversations followed a predictable pattern, her asking surface questions about my work and apartment, me providing brief answers, and both of us avoiding any mention of the emotional distance between us. She rarely volunteered information about their lives, unless I specifically asked, and even then, the details were scarce. There were moments when I considered cutting contact completely, but something always held me back. Perhaps it was the memory of the mother who had once been my whole world, or maybe just the stubborn hope that someday she might see how she had hurt me. Either way, I kept that tenuous connection alive, despite the pain it sometimes caused. So when I received an actual phone call from her on a random Tuesday, I was surprised. "Natalia, darling," she began, her voice carrying a warmth I hadn't heard in years. "We would love for you to join us for dinner this Saturday. It's been far too long since we have seen you." The invitation sparked a foolish hope in me. Maybe time had changed things. Maybe she had finally recognized the unfairness of the past years. I spent hours preparing for that dinner, choosing my outfit carefully, and even buying an expensive bottle of wine to bring. The woman who arrived at Richard's house was accomplished, confident, and eager for reconciliation, a far cry from the hurt college student who had last crossed that threshold. Richard greeted me with his trademark charm, ear-kissing my cheeks, and complimenting my appearance, as if we'd seen each other last week instead of 3 years ago. Mum hugged me tightly, whispering, "You look beautiful, honey. I missed you." For a moment, it felt genuine. Jason arrived late now, a polished young man of 28, with the assured manner of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. He brought his girlfriend Amanda, a poised blonde from a socially prominent family. After introductions, Richard proudly announced the real reason for the gathering. "Jason has some exciting news," he beamed, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "He's been promoted to Vice President of Development at Wallace Properties, and he and Amanda are engaged. We're thrilled to be welcoming her to the family." The dinner that followed was an exercise in exclusion through inclusion. They asked about my life, but in ways that highlighted the difference in our circumstances. Richard's pointed questions about my living situation made my perfectly nice apartment sound inadequate. When I mentioned my recent award for a marketing campaign, the conversation quickly pivoted to Jason's business accomplishments. The true revelation came over dessert, when they casually discussed preparations for Jason's upcoming move. "The house needs some updating," Amanda was saying, "but the location is perfect." "What house?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Oh, the Franklin Street property," my mother replied casually. "The one we bought for Jason when he finished graduate school. It's a lovely starter home, but with the wedding coming up, they're looking for something larger." I nearly choked on my coffee. They had purchased a house for Jason, a house that had never been mentioned to me, while I had worked multiple jobs to afford my studio apartment. The conversation continued around me as I processed this information, the familiar feeling of being an outsider in my own family washing over me again. Later, when I helped Mum clear the dishes, I found a moment to ask about her health, having noticed her slight limp and occasional wince throughout the evening. "Oh, it's nothing," she dismissed. "Just some arthritis acting up." It was only when Richard stepped out to take a business call that Jason let slip the truth. Mum had undergone hip replacement surgery 6 months earlier. The casual way he mentioned it, assuming I knew, was like a physical blow. My own mother had had major surgery, and no one had thought to tell me. I waited until we were alone in the kitchen before confronting her. "Why didn't you tell me you had surgery?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I didn't want to worry you," she said, avoiding my eyes as she rearranged perfectly clean dishes. "You were busy with your career, and Richard handled everything. Jason came by every day to check on me. What about me? Didn't I deserve the chance to help take care of you too?" Her expression changed, then a flicker of the mother I remembered showing through. "You're right," she admitted softly. "I should have called you. It's just that Richard feels I didn't let her finish. Richard feels." Those 2 words had dictated our relationship for years. It's always about what Richard feels, what Richard wants, what Richard thinks is best. When did you stop being my mother and just become Richard's wife? The hurt in her eyes was real, but so was my pain. I left soon after, promising to call more regularly to try to rebuild what we'd lost. And I did try setting up a schedule of weekly calls that she seemed to welcome. For 2 months, we spoke regularly, carefully rebuilding a fragile connection. Then came the call that changed everything. Natalia Richards' voice was uncharacteristically subdued. "It's your mother. She's been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors are saying months, not years." In that moment, all the hurt and resentment were overshadowed by one devastating thought. I was running out of time to reconcile with my mother. I had no idea that the worst betrayal was yet to come. The 3 months following Mum's diagnosis were a whirlwind of hospital visits, doctors' consultations, and painful revelations. I immediately requested family leave from my job, using all my saved vacation time to be present for her treatments. Each morning, I would arrive at the house I once called home, now feeling more alien than ever, to drive Mum to appointments or simply sit with her on days when her strength failed. Despite my constant presence, Richard and Jason treated me like an intruder, consulting with doctors without me and making decisions about Mum's care as if I had no right to input. Richard would check his watch impatiently when I asked questions during medical appointments, while Jason would sigh and tap his foot. Several times I arrived to find they had scheduled treatments without informing me, only to be told, "We didn't think you needed to be there for that one." The dynamic was excruciating. I was desperately trying to make up for lost time with my dying mother, while they seemed determined to maintain their exclusive family unit even now. The only comfort came in quiet moments when Mum was lucid enough for conversation. During these precious intervals, something of our old connection resurfaced. One afternoon, as I adjusted her pillows while Richard and Jason were out, she took my hand weakly. "You look so much like your father," she whispered, her eyes clear for the first time in days. "He would be so proud of the woman you've become, Natalia." I wanted to ask her then about all the years of distance, about why she had allowed me to be pushed aside. But looking at her frail body drowning in the hospice bed that had been set up in the downstairs guest room, I couldn't bring myself to cause her more pain. Instead, I simply held her hand and told her I loved her. There were moments when regret seemed to cloud her face, particularly when Richard made dismissive comments about my presence. Once, when he suggested I didn't need to return the next day, since he'd hired a nurse, I saw her eyes flash with something like the old protective instinct. She weakly insisted I want Natalia here, but she never directly addressed the years of favoritism or her role in enabling it. As her condition deteriorated, the boundaries between day and night blurred into an endless vigil. I slept on a cot beside her bed more nights than not, catching moments of rest between her pain medication cycles. During one such night, I woke to find her watching me, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. "I'm sorry," she murmured so softly I almost missed it. "For everything. I thought I was doing the right thing." Before I could ask what she meant, she drifted back to sleep, and by morning she seemed to have no recollection of the conversation. 2 days later, she slipped into a coma. The doctors said it would be a matter of days. Richard arranged for a rotation, so someone was always with her. During my shifts, I would hold her hand and tell her all the things I wished we'd talked about over the years, my hopes, my disappointments, memories from our life before Richard. Sometimes I imagined a slight pressure from her fingers in response, but it might have been wishful thinking. Mum passed away on a Tuesday morning with the fall sun streaming through the windows. I had just stepped out to make a cup of coffee after sitting with her all night. When I returned, Richard was standing by the bed, his face impassive as he informed me, "She's gone." Just like that, as if he were commenting on the weather. The funeral was a performance of grief that left me feeling more isolated than ever. Richard, as the grieving widower, received condolences from business associates and country club friends who barely acknowledged my existence. Jason stood at his father's side, the dutiful son, while I was positioned slightly apart, the daughter who had been absent for years, according to the narrative Richard had apparently cultivated. Several of Mum's older friends sought me out, expressing surprise that I'd been caring for her in her final months. "We thought you two had fallen out years ago," one confided. "Richard always gave the impression you were too busy with your own life to be involved." The realization that he'd been actively undermining my relationship with my mother, even among her friends, was another wound to bear. A week after the funeral, Richard's attorney, Franklin Davis, summoned us to his office for the reading of the will. I arrived early, dressed professionally, unsure what to expect, but hoping for some final message from Mum, some acknowledgement of our reconciliation in those final months. The office was all mahogany and leather, with Richard's imposing presence dominating the room even before the proceedings began. Jason sat confidently beside him while I took a chair slightly apart, already feeling like an outsider. Mr. Davis cleared his throat and began reading. The document started with standard legal language before addressing the distribution of assets. I listened with increasing disbelief as he read through provision after provision. The house and all its contents to Richard. The family vacation property in Maine to Richard. All investment accounts and insurance policies to Richard. A trust established for Jason containing funds that would have been my college education money had Richard not redirected it years before. Specific bequests of jewelry and family heirlooms to Jason to give to his future wife. My name did not appear once. Not once in the entire document. Is this some kind of mistake, I asked when Davis finished, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. There must be something I'm missing. The attorney glanced uncomfortably at Richard, who spoke with cold precision. There is no mistake. Sarah decided what was best for the family. You chose to distance yourself years ago. These are the consequences of your choices. I turned to him in shock. I distanced myself after you systematically pushed me out, after you converted my bedroom without warning, excluded me from family decisions, and bought houses for your son while I worked multiple jobs to pay my rent. Richard's expression remained impassive. Your mother and I discussed this at length. She agreed with my assessment. Jason, who had remained silent until now, added with undisguised satisfaction, "You were never really part of the family anyway. Not like I was." Something shattered inside me at those words. I stood up, shaking so violently I had to steady myself against the desk. All those years of maintaining the relationship of calling, despite the pain of rushing to her side when she was ill, had meant nothing. In the end, my own mother had written me out of her life, completely erasing me from her legacy as if our bond had never existed. I don't remember much about the drive home. The world had narrowed to a tunnel of betrayal and grief. In my apartment, I curled into a ball on my bed, still in my funeral clothes, and gave myself over to the devastating realization that everything I had believed about my childhood, about my mother's love, had been a lie. Or if not a lie, then something so fragile it had been completely destroyed by Richard without a trace remaining. That night, alone in the dark, I felt truly orphaned for the first time. The months following the will reading were the darkest of my life. I fell into a depression that made even basic functioning a challenge. My apartment, once a sanctuary, became a prison of memories and unanswered questions. I called in sick to work so often that my position was eventually threatened, jolting me into the realization that I was on the verge of losing the only solid thing left in my life. Each night, I would replay moments from my childhood, searching for signs I had missed, clues that my mother had never truly loved me the way I had loved her. Each remembered laugh, each pancake sundae, each bedtime story seemed to mock me now. Had it all been conditional love, so easily transferred to a new family? When a better option came along, I stopped answering calls from friends, cancelled plans, and retreated into solitude. Tara, my college roommate, was the only one who refused to be pushed away. After multiple unanswered texts, she appeared at my door with groceries and a firm resolution to stay until I showed signs of life beyond basic survival. "You need help, Natalia," she insisted after witnessing my empty refrigerator and unwashed dishes. "This isn't grief anymore. This is something deeper." She stayed the weekend cleaning my apartment, making sure I ate, and finally convincing me to make an appointment with a therapist. Dr. Amelia Wilson became my lifeline. A compassionate woman in her 50s with calm eyes and a direct manner, she created a space where I could express the magnitude of my pain without judgment. "It's not just that you lost your mother twice," she observed during our third session. "Once to Richard and once to death. You've also lost the story you had about your childhood." Week by week, we untangled the complex web of manipulation that had characterized my relationship with Richard and, by extension, with my mother. She helped me see that my mother had been a victim of emotional control as well, though that understanding didn't immediately ease the pain of her final betrayal. "You can acknowledge her weakness without excusing what happened to you," Dr. Wilson said. "People can love deeply and still fail those they love. The two aren't mutually exclusive." As the fog of depression began to lift, I refocused on my career, pouring myself into projects with a new intensity. My colleagues noticed the change, and my work improved dramatically, fueled by emotions I was learning to channel productively. 6 months after Mum's death, I was offered a promotion to senior designer with a substantial salary increase and more creative control. Alongside my professional rehabilitation, I began rebuilding my social connections. Tara introduced me to her wider circle of friends, and I gradually opened myself to new relationships. This chosen family of friends sustained me in ways my blood relations never had, showing up for celebrations and emergencies alike with unwavering support. Dr. Wilson encouraged me to redefine my understanding of family. "Family isn't just who you're born to," she reminded me. "It's who shows up for you, who makes space for you at their table, who sees you clearly and values what they see. I was just beginning to find my footing in this new understanding when fate intervened in the form of Barbara Henderson, my mother's oldest friend from before her marriage to Richard. Our paths crossed at a local coffee shop nearly 10 months after Mum's death. I almost didn't recognize her, but she called my name as I was waiting for my order. "Natalia, is that you? I haven't seen you since the funeral." Do you have a moment to sit? Barbara's familiar face, lined now with additional years, brought back memories of birthday parties and school events from before Richard. She had gradually disappeared from our lives after the wedding, one of many old connections that had been systematically severed. Over coffee, she studied me with kind eyes. "You look so much like Sarah at your age. It's remarkable." Then, with unexpected directness, "I need to tell you something about your mother, Natalia." Something I should have said at the funeral, but it never seemed the right moment. My heart raced as she reached into her purse and removed an envelope. After Sarah was diagnosed, she called me. We hadn't spoken in years, Richard had made sure of that, but she reached out when she knew she was dying. She asked me to look through some old papers she'd stored in my attic years ago, papers Richard didn't know about. Inside the envelope were several handwritten letters addressed to me, dated over the years of our estrangement. Letters my mother had written but never sent. She was afraid, Barbara explained, watching me stare at the familiar handwriting. Richard controlled everything: their finances, their social life, even her relationship with you. He convinced her that your distance was rejection, that you didn't want a relationship with her anymore. When she tried to reach out, he'd intercept calls, screen her mail. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten until she was already very ill. I could hardly process what Barbara was saying, but we talked on the phone. I visited. Only when Richard allowed it, she said gently, only on his terms. Sarah told me that he threatened to contest her rights to any assets if she went against his wishes regarding you. She was terrified of being left with nothing in her illness, of being unable to afford her treatments. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All those years, I'd believed my mother was choosing Richard's preferences over me, when she'd been systematically isolated and manipulated herself. "There's more," Barbara continued hesitantly. "The will that was read wasn't the one Sarah intended. She had made a new one with a different attorney, one that included you equally with Jason. But Richard found out, and the look on her face told me everything." "Are you saying he forced her to change it back while she was ill, when she was medicated?" Barbara nodded grimly. "Sarah called me in tears 2 weeks before she lost lucidity. She said Richard had brought his attorney to the house when she was having a particularly bad day in pain and heavily sedated. He had her sign papers she could barely read." I sat stunned, the coffee between us growing cold as the truth of what had happened slowly crystallized. My mother hadn't betrayed me after all, at least not in the way I had believed. She had been a victim of Richard's control until the very end. As painful as this revelation was, it also offered a strange liberation. The mother I remembered, the one who had loved me unconditionally before Richard, hadn't been a figment of my imagination. She had existed. And somewhere inside the woman who had been subsumed by Richard's influence, she had continued to exist, however imperfectly. When I finally found my voice, I asked the question that had been burning inside me since the will reading. "Is there anything I can do? Any way to contest what happened?" Barbara reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "There's a lawyer you should talk to. She specializes in cases like yours. If anyone can help you find justice, Grace Kim can." As I left the coffee shop, clutching my mother's undelivered letters and Grace's contact information, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Purpose. The fog of depression and betrayal was burning off in the heat of a new emotion: righteous anger. For the first time since my mother's death, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The downtown law offices of Kim and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a sleek glass building, a world away from the wood-panelled sanctuary of Richard's attorney. Grace Kim herself defied my expectations. I had imagined someone older, perhaps with the same imposing presence as Franklin Davis. Instead, I was met by a compact woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. After I explained my situation, including Barbara's revelations, she took meticulous notes before addressing me directly. "What you're describing is textbook undue influence, Ms. Wallace. Particularly troubling is the allegation that your mother signed a revised will while heavily medicated." She leaned forward. "But I want to be completely transparent with you. These cases are difficult to prove, especially when the primary witness, your mother, is deceased." "Do you think we have a chance?" I asked. Grace considered for a moment. "The fact that your mother had previously drafted a different will helps us significantly, especially if we can locate it." The testimony of her friend Barbara is valuable, but will need more. Medical records showing your mother's mental state during the time the final will was signed. Witness testimony about Richard's controlling behaviour. And most importantly, documentation of the original will. Together we crafted a strategy. Grace would file the initial legal challenge while I worked on gathering additional evidence. The process was exhausting and often painful, requiring me to dig through years of painful memories while contacting people from my mother's past who might be willing to testify. Barbara's help proved invaluable. Through her connections, we located Mariah's mother and Richard's former housekeeper, who had worked for them during my high school years. Maria described witnessing Richard's controlling behaviour firsthand, including intercepting my phone calls and mail. I remember how sad your mother would be after he told her you had cancelled plans or were too busy to talk, she revealed. Sometimes I knew it wasn't true because I had taken your messages myself. The breakthrough came when Barbara remembered that my mother had consulted with a small local attorney rather than someone from Richard's social circle. After numerous calls and dead ends, we located James Fergusona's elderly lawyer nearing retirement who remembered Sarah Wallace clearly. She was very specific about wanting to provide equally for both children, he recalled when we met at his modest office. Unusual enough that it stuck with me. Most of my clients with blended families have more complicated arrangements, but your mother was adamant about equality between you and your stepbrother. Even more crucially, Ferguson had maintained his files and produced a copy of the original will, dated just 3 months before my mother's death. The document clearly showed an equal division of assets between Jason and me, with specific family heirlooms designated for me, including my grandmother's jewellery collection and family photographs that held no monetary value, but immeasurable sentimental worth. Armed with this evidence, Grace filed the formal challenge. Richard's response was swift and vicious. The phone calls began the very next day. "You ungrateful little bitch," he snarled when I answered. "After everything we've done for you." Your mother would be disgusted by this behaviour. Jason followed with his own call, his tone dripping with contempt. "Dad told me what you're doing. You always were jealous of what I had. This is just pathetic, Natalia. No one is going to believe you over Dad." I reported both calls to Grace, who added harassment to our growing case file. "Don't engage," she advised. "Let them dig themselves deeper." The legal process moved forward with excruciating slowness. Depositions were scheduled, medical records subpoenaed, and financial documents scrutinised. During my own deposition, I had to recount years of emotional neglect, while Richard's attorney attempted to paint me as an ungrateful, absent daughter who had abandoned her mother. The hardest day came when I had to listen to Richard's deposition, his smooth voice, describing a fictional family narrative where I had chosen to distance myself despite their constant efforts to include me. She was invited to every family event, he stated with practiced sincerity. We were all disappointed when she rarely showed up. Each lie tore at wounds that had barely begun to heal, but I forced myself to remain composed, drawing strength from the knowledge that I was fighting for the truth as much as for any inheritance. An unexpected ally emerged during this period. Amanda's Jason's fiancé reached out to me privately, requesting to meet at a cafe far from their usual haunts. Nervously glancing over her shoulder, she confided, "I've seen how Richard operates. Jason is becoming just like him, and it's scaring me." She described witnessing Richard coaching Jason on his testimony, creating a timeline of fake attempts to include me in family events. He keeps meticulous records of everything Amanda revealed. There's a safe in his home office with documents going back years. He mentioned something about your mother's medical forms being in there, ones that would be better left private. This information proved crucial. Grace's request for specific documentation led to a judge's order for Richard's records, including the contents of his safe. Among the papers discovered was a form signed by my mother, supposedly authorizing Richard's attorney to draft a new will on her behalf. The date coincided exactly with medical records showing she had been administered morphine for pain only hours earlier. The most damning evidence came from the hospital's visitor logs and medication charts. They clearly showed Richard had dismissed the regular nurse and administered my mother's medication himself shortly before witnesses arrived to observe her signing the new will, a clear violation of medical protocols and suspicious timing that even Richard's expensive legal team couldn't explain away. Everything came to a head in the courtroom during Richard's cross-examination by Grace. Under her relentless questioning, his carefully constructed facade began to crack. When she produced bank records showing he had used my mother's inheritance from her parents to fund a failing business venture without her knowledge, his composure finally shattered. I did what was necessary to protect my family, he shouted, his face flushed with anger. Sarah was weak when it came to Natalia. She would have squandered everything we built on a girl who turned her back on us. The courtroom fell silent at this outburst. Even Jason, sitting in the front row, looked shocked at his father's admission. For the first time, I saw doubt cross his face as he regarded the man he had idolized his entire life. The judge, a stern woman with decades of experience, saw through Richard's performance. Her ruling came down firmly on my side, acknowledging the clear evidence of undue influence and questionable circumstances surrounding the final will. She invalidated the document Richard had forced my mother to sign and reinstated the original will Ferguson had drafted under my mother's clear instructions. As we left the courtroom, I passed Jason in the hallway. The arrogance had drained from his face, replaced by confusion, and the beginning of something that looked like remorse. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw the child he had once been, shaped by a father's toxic influence, into someone who believed privilege was his birthright. He said nothing then, but a week later, a package arrived at my apartment containing my grandmother's jewelry box with all its contents intact. The accompanying note was brief. I didn't know what Dad had done. I'm sorry. It wasn't enough to erase years of hurt, but it was the beginning of something I hadn't expected. The possibility that Richard's manipulation had claimed more victims than I had realized. The legal settlement brought significant changes to my life, though not in the ways most people would expect. Yes, I received my rightful share of my mother's estate, including family heirlooms and financial assets that Richard had tried to keep from me. But the true value of winning the case lay in the validation it provided, the legal acknowledgement that I had been wronged, that my mother had not willingly cast me aside. The first thing I did with my portion of the estate was establish a scholarship in my mother's name at the university I had attended. The Sarah Wallace Resilience Scholarship would provide financial support to students from blended families facing hardship, a way of creating something positive from our painful story. The irony that Richard's money would now fund what he had denied me wasn't lost on me, but my motivation went beyond petty revenge. It was about reclaiming my mother's legacy from his control. 3 weeks after the court ruling, I received an unexpected call from Jason. His voice lacked the entitled confidence I was accustomed to, instead sounding hesitant, almost vulnerable. "Could we meet for coffee?" he asked. "There's a lot I need to say to you." Our meeting was awkward at first, both of us carrying years of resentment and misunderstanding. Jason stared into his coffee for a long time before finally speaking. "I've been talking to a therapist," he began. "After everything came out in court about Dad, I needed to make sense of, well, my entire childhood, I guess." He explained that following the trial, he'd begun questioning everything he'd been told about me, about our family. "The more I look back, the more I see how Dad manipulated everyone, including me. He told me you were jealous, that you resented me for having a father when yours had died, that you were using Mum for money. I believed him because it was easier than questioning why you were being treated differently." I listened silently, not ready to absolve him, but recognizing the courage it took to confront these truths. For so many years, Jason had been the favored son in my narrative, the usurper who had taken my mother's love. Now I was forced to see him differently, as another player in Richard's manipulation, shaped by the same controlling hand that had damaged my relationship with Mum. "I can't change what happened." Jason continued, meeting my eyes for the first time. "I can't give you back those years with Mum, but I want you to know I've broken things off with Dad. I'm selling the house he bought me and returning the money to the estate. It should have been shared with you from the beginning." His apology didn't immediately heal the wounds of the past, but it opened a door I had thought permanently closed. We weren't suddenly siblings in any meaningful sense, but we had taken the first step towards something new, something built on truth, rather than Richard's carefully constructed fiction. The process of sorting through my mother's personal belongings proved to be an unexpected path to healing. Richard had kept everything in storage after her death, intending to dispose of it without my input. Now each box I opened was like recovering a piece of our shared history that had been stolen from me. Among her possessions, I found a journal she had kept sporadically over the years. The early entries were filled with joy and pride in my accomplishments, her love for me evident in every word. As the years with Richard progressed, the tone changed, revealing her growing confusion and pain as she found herself caught between her husband and daughter. The final entries, written during her illness, contained her deepest regrets. I failed her. She had written the handwriting shaky but determined. I thought I was protecting her by giving her independence, but I was really just avoiding Richard's anger. Natalia deserved better from me. I pray she finds the letter I've left with Barbara and knows that I never stopped loving her, even when I was too weak to show it. Those words broke something open inside me, releasing the last hardened pieces of resentment I had been carrying. My mother had failed me. Yes, but she had been a victim too, caught in a web of emotional manipulation that had isolated her from everyone who might have helped her see the truth. Understanding this didn't erase the years of pain, but it allowed me to hold both truths. Simultaneously, she had hurt me deeply, and she had loved me the best she could within the constraints of Richard's control. With this understanding came a new relationship with my own anger. For so long, it had been directed at both Richard and my mother, a burning resentment that threatened to consume me. Through continued therapy and the support of my chosen family, I began to transform that anger into something more productive, a fierce commitment to boundaries and self-protection, but also compassion for those trapped in controlling relationships. 3 years after the court case, my career had flourished beyond my early ambitions. I had left my agency position to start my own design firm, one that emphasized work-life balance and family-friendly policies. The lessons of my past influenced every aspect of how I structured the company, creating an environment where no one would have to choose between professional success and personal relationships. My personal life expanded as well. The friends who had sustained me through my darkest times became the foundation of a chosen family more reliable and loving than my biological one had ever been. Sunday brunches replaced the pancake tradition of my childhood, creating new rituals with people who chose to be present in my life. I also became involved with organizations supporting those recovering from family estrangement, sharing my story to help others recognize patterns of manipulation and control. Through this work, I met countless others who had experienced similar betrayals, people working to rebuild their sense of self-worth after being told they were unworthy of love or inclusion. As for Richard, I heard through Jason that his business had suffered following the public revelation of his behavior. Many of his society friends distanced themselves uncomfortable with the unsavory details that had emerged during the trial. He sold the house where I had once lived and moved to Florida, effectively removing himself from our lives. His absence was neither celebrated nor mourned. It simply was a closing of a painful chapter. Jason and I maintained a cautious relationship, meeting occasionally for lunch or coffee. We would never have the easy siblinghood that might have developed under different circumstances, but there was a growing mutual respect between us. He had begun working with a non-profit focused on affordable housing, a deliberate step away from his father's world of luxury real estate development. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that the inheritance I fought for wasn't really about money or possessions. It was about reclaiming my place in my mother's story, asserting that I mattered, that our bond had been real despite all that came after. The true legacy my mother left me wasn't contained in her will, but in the love we shared before Richard, in the strength I discovered when fighting for the truth, and in the capacity for forgiveness I didn't know I possessed. What I learned through this journey is that family isn't defined by blood or legal documents. It's built through consistent care, through showing up in both celebrations and crises, through seeing someone clearly and valuing what you see. The family I have now, I built myself piece by piece from relationships based on choice rather than obligation. I sometimes wonder what Mum would think of the woman I've become, of the life I've created from the ashes of betrayal. I like to believe she would recognize her own resilience in me, the determination that sustained her as a single mother before Richard entered our lives. And perhaps she would find peace knowing that in the end, Richard's attempts to erase me from her legacy failed. The bond between mother and daughter proved stronger than his manipulation, enduring beyond betrayal, beyond death itself. Have you ever had to rebuild your sense of family after betrayal? How did you find healing? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories of resilience and healing. Remember that your worth isn't determined by those who failed to see it, but by the strength you find in rebuilding. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you peace on yours wherever it may lead.